Hi, my name's Rowan Hale. When I was a kid, my father used to say, "A few punches and you'll finally behave." He said it like a lesson, like pain could build obedience. The night he beat my mother, he thought he'd won again. But the next morning, we set the table. A spotless room, a perfect dinner, a quiet trap. Because that night wasn't about pleasing him, it was about ending him. And when he found out the real reason for that dinner, he froze. You ever wonder what happens when the monster finally realizes he's not the one being obeyed anymore? The sound of glass breaking didn't make me flinch anymore. It used to, years ago, when I was still naive enough to think that every loud crash meant something worse was coming. Now it was just another sound in the house, just another reminder that peace in our home was as fragile as that wine glass now shattered on the floor. Mom stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hands trembling, eyes glistening under the flickering ceiling light. She didn't say a word. She never did. Dad's voice, low, sharp, and full of that same authority he used when he talked about his army days, cut through the silence. "You should have known better, Mara. I told you to keep your mouth shut." Then came the dull, heavy sound of a hand meeting skin. It wasn't the first. It wouldn't be the last. I stood a few steps away, half hidden in the shadow of the hallway. My body didn't move, but my stomach twisted. Every part of me screamed to step in, to stop him. But there's a kind of fear that paralyzes you. The kind you learn after 28 years of watching the same scene replay itself. Dad grabbed his coat, muttered something about getting a drink, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. The quiet that followed was louder than the shouting. Mom exhaled shakily. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and said almost gently, "He'll cool off." She always said that. We didn't talk after that. We never did. We just started cleaning. I picked up the shards of glass while she gathered the broken pieces of the picture frame. Each sound, the broom on tile, the water running in the sink, the soft drag of fabric against the table, was our language. Words didn't help in this house. Cleanliness did. Order did. "Let's get dinner ready," she whispered after a while. Her voice was soft but tired, like she was talking through a wall. I nodded, rinsing a dish that didn't need washing. The routine was muscle memory. Cook. Set the table. Pretend. If the table looked beautiful, if the food was hot, maybe we'd get through the night without another storm. That's what she believed. The table. It always started and ended there. It had scratches from years of dinners like this. Some deep enough to hold memories I wished I could sand away. I remembered being 10, crouched under it, hiding while Dad yelled about the importance of respect. He'd lecture between sips of whiskey, calling it discipline. Mom would say nothing, holding her breath until he was too drunk to stand. That night, while wiping the table, my fingers traced those old scratches. I could almost hear my younger self asking, "Was it my fault too?" Mom was setting out the silverware, aligning each fork perfectly beside each plate. Her hands moved with practiced grace. She was good at this, making the wreckage look like home again. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. She paused, then smiled the way people smile when they're out of words. "It's what keeps things normal." Normal. That word had no meaning here. By the time Dad came back, the apartment smelled like roasted chicken and candle wax. The lights flickered again as he stepped in, his boots heavy against the old floorboards. He looked around. His eyes scanned the spotless room, the food, the plates. The woman who still loved him enough to pretend. Then that smirk, sharp and familiar, spread across his face. "See?" he said, walking past me like I wasn't there. "I told you. A few hits and you're obedient again." Mom lowered her eyes. My chest tightened, not from fear anymore, but something colder. I wanted to speak, to tell him that obedience wasn't peace, that fear wasn't love, but the words stuck somewhere deep in my throat. He poured himself a drink, humming an old country tune as if the last hour had never happened. I watched him, and for the first time, something inside me didn't bend. It snapped, quietly but completely. He took a sip, satisfied with his world. I stood there, still as the flickering light, realizing something I never had before. It wasn't his rage that scared me anymore. It was my silence. He smirked again, tapping the side of his glass. "That's how it's done, son. Discipline. Respect." But that night, something inside me didn't bow. It broke. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the thermostat, the quiet groan of pipes in the wall. Every sound was too familiar. Every sound made it harder to ignore what I'd felt crack inside me at dinner. By the time the sky outside began to turn that soft pink of early morning, I was already dressed, sitting at the edge of the bed, lacing up my boots like it was just another Tuesday. From the kitchen, I heard dishes clink, the faucet turn on, the scrape of a chair being pulled back from the table. Mom was up, like always. I walked out to find her cooking eggs, the scent of toast and bleach clinging to the air like it was trying to scrub the night away. She didn't look at me. Her face was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes from years of surviving by pretending nothing's wrong. Dad was already at the table, coffee in hand, newspaper spread out in front of him like he hadn't told his wife to shut up the night before, like he hadn't hit her, like the bruises she tried to cover with makeup didn't exist. "Morning," he said, casual, not looking up. "Gas bill came in. Says we're over again. Gotta watch that." I didn't respond. I just poured myself some coffee and sat across from him, staring at the steam rising from the mug. The heat didn't soothe me. It just made my palms sweat. He kept talking about the weather, about some politician he hated, about the damn neighbor's dog barking too much. All of it with that same smooth tone. The voice of a man who knows how to look good in public. Mom set a plate in front of him. Eggs, toast, sliced apples. She smiled. Not the kind that reaches your eyes, but the kind that says, "I just want peace." "Thanks, hun," he said, tapping his wedding ring against the side of the plate. That sound, metallic, sharp, had always meant one thing. Don't push it. I glanced at her, and something twisted in my gut. She was pretending again, and I was too. He looked over at me. "You want eggs?" I shook my head. "Already ate." That was a lie. He sipped his coffee, folded his paper, and leaned back in his chair. "Things feel quiet today. That's good. We need more quiet around here." The air was thick, like waiting for a storm that hadn't hit yet. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my cup. He noticed, smirked. "You all right, son? You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't answer. I looked at my mom, really looked at her. The way she stood near the stove, her shoulders pulled in, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. That wasn't living. That was surviving. "You shouldn't talk to her like that," I said. The words didn't come out loud, but they came out clear. And when I said them, everything in the room froze. His fork paused mid-air. He looked at me, slowly, like he was sizing me up for the first time in years. "What did you say?" he asked. Calm, too calm. I met his eyes. "You shouldn't talk to her like that." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Son, I taught you better than to question me in my house." Mom's hand dropped the spatula. It clattered on the counter, loud in the silence. I stared at him, and something inside me, whatever had snapped the night before, lit up. "Then maybe it's not your house anymore." For a second, I thought he might lunge across the table. His jaw tightened. His hand clenched around the handle of his mug. But he didn't move. Not yet. Mom gasped, and I felt her fear reach out like a hand around my neck. But I didn't back down. There was a shift in the air, not loud, but heavy, like something sacred had just been broken. I looked away and stared at the coffee cup in my hands. It trembled slightly, and I knew he saw it. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. He stood slowly, adjusted his belt like he was preparing for work, not war. "You always had a mouth on you," he said. "I thought I taught that out of you." I didn't respond. And he didn't push further, not yet. He grabbed his keys, muttered something about checking the mail, and left without another word. The door closed behind him. The silence that followed was deeper than before, but different. It wasn't fear. It was aftermath. Mom finally looked at me. Her eyes were wide, glassy. "You shouldn't have said that." "I had to," I told her. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then just nodded and turned away. I sat back down at the table, took another sip of coffee, cold now, and let the quiet sit with me. A memory drifted up. Me at 12, standing on the lawn with Cliff, neighbors waving from their porches. "Your dad's a good man," they'd say. "Hard worker, stands up for his family." They didn't see what I saw. The belt marks on my arm, the way Mom flinched when keys rattled in the door. The charm he used in public was a mask, and he wore it well. People loved him, trusted him, called him a hero. But I knew better. I'd always known. I just never had the guts to say it out loud. Until now. I turned the mug in my hands, the ceramic warm again from my grip. My heart was still racing, but not from fear. From something else. Hope, maybe. "Then maybe it's not your house anymore," I said, my voice shaking. Not from fear, but from knowing it was the first truth I'd ever told him. There was no yelling after that day, no slamming doors, no snarled commands from the hallway, just silence. That's what made it worse. 3 days passed. On the surface, everything looked peaceful. The floors were mopped, the blinds drawn halfway, the coffee brewed right on schedule. But something was wrong. Not outside, not even in the air, but underneath it all. Like the quiet hum before a tornado levels everything you thought was stable. On the second day, he brought groceries home, more than usual. He even picked up Mom's favorite brand of cereal, the one he used to mock her for liking. He unloaded the bags like it was just another Saturday chore, humming some old country song from his Navy days. His voice cracked on a note, but he didn't stop. "Picked up that socket wrench you were talking about," he said to me, not looking up from the pantry. "Figured you could help me look at the truck tomorrow." I nodded, slow and tight. "Sure." Mom smiled faintly when she thought he wasn't watching. "It's a good sign," she whispered later in the kitchen. "He's trying." But I knew better. His quiet was never peace. It was strategy. That third day, the heat was heavy, the kind of humid that made your skin stick to the couch. Sunlight streamed through the blinds in sharp, angled slats, carving up the living room into uneven pieces of light and shadow. It made everything look like a crime scene, too clean, too planned. I was wiping down the counter when my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Dean. "Hey, I saw your text. Look, I know things get tense around there. Just don't poke the bear, man. You know how he gets. Call me if it gets bad, all right?" Dean always did this. Dropped in just enough to sound like he cared, but never enough to show up. 2 hours away, and somehow always too busy. I didn't blame him, not fully, but I also didn't expect him anymore. Right before noon, Dad called from the garage. "Rowan, let's get on that truck, before the sun gets worse." I wiped my hands on a rag, grabbed the new wrench, and followed him outside. The heat hit hard. The driveway shimmered and the hood of the truck radiated like a stovetop. He handed me a cold soda, then popped the hood open. "Throttle's sticking again," he said. "Might be a loose cable, or you didn't tighten that clamp enough last time." I didn't reply. I just got to work. I preferred the language of machines. They didn't lie to you. When something was broken, it showed. He leaned beside me, watching. "You know," he said slowly, "you embarrassed your mother that morning." My fingers froze around the wrench. "You think standing up like that makes you a man?" he went on. "Makes you right?" Still, I said nothing. Just tightened the clamp. He kept going. "I've raised this family with structure, with discipline, not softness, not weakness." The wrench slipped in my grip, clanking against the engine. He smiled then. That small, crooked smirk I'd seen too many times. The one he wore right before he said something meant to carve you open. "But you're learning. I can tell." He patted me on the shoulder. "See, you're starting to get it." It was the exact tone he used with Mom after an apology that never came. The same cadence, the same poisonous affection. And it hit me like a punch to the chest. He wasn't punishing me. He was trying to recruit me. He wasn't trying to silence me. He was trying to mold me. I stood still for a second, hand tightening around the wrench again. I could hear the cicadas buzzing. I could feel the sweat roll down my back. I could taste the coppery heat in the air. Then I dropped the wrench. The sound was louder than it should have been. Metal hitting concrete, clean and final. He turned sharply. "Pick that up." I didn't move. I said, "Pick it up, son." I looked at him, square in the eyes. "I'm not your soldier." And I walked. I left him standing there by his open truck, hands on his hips, mouth slightly open. Back inside, the AC hummed. I passed Mom in the hallway. She looked up from folding towels, confused by the sound outside. "You done already?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm done." She didn't ask what that meant. I don't think she needed to. That night, I lay on the couch instead of going to my room. I didn't trust the silence anymore. Didn't trust what he'd do when he figured out the control was slipping. The clock ticked past midnight. Then the front door opened. He walked in slow, like he didn't want to wake ghosts. The lights were low. One of them flickered again. That same pale blue tone I remembered from a few nights before. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around the apartment. Too long, like he was measuring it. Then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, just measured. "We'll have dinner tomorrow," he said. "Just the three of us." I nodded. But inside, something screamed. "This isn't dinner. It's a setup." I didn't sleep much after he said it. His voice, too calm, too certain. "We'll have dinner tomorrow. Just the three of us." Stayed with me like smoke on a shirt. By morning, I was already planning. I spent the next day in a haze. Not because I was confused, but because I couldn't afford to show I was awake. Alert. The only way to stay one step ahead of my father was to let him think I hadn't moved at all. Around 4:00 p.m., I took the small camera from my drawer, the one I bought months ago, but never had the nerve to use. It looked like a regular USB charger. I plugged it in near the bookshelf, made sure the angle caught the dinner table, and double-checked the blinking red light. Still steady. Mom was already in the kitchen by the time I stepped in. She was slicing carrots, but not like she normally did. Her rhythm was off, jerky. Her hands moved like she was chasing some memory of peace, not making food. Her shoulders rose a little when she heard my footsteps. "We don't have to cook everything he asked for," I said gently, setting down the bowls. She glanced at me, eyes tired but alert. "It's easier if we do. Less to argue about." She didn't say his name. She rarely did anymore. Just he, like naming a storm gives it power. I moved closer and took the knife from her hand. She was holding the sharper one. Without a word, I switched it for the dull paring knife and set the sharper blade into the sink behind me. She noticed. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but mostly something sadder. Something that meant thank you and I'm sorry all at once. "I'll handle the roast," I said. "Why don't you set the table?" She nodded. "All right." As she moved, I watched her from the corner of my eye. She laid out the plates like she was setting pieces in a game she didn't know how to win. Each fork aligned just so. Each napkin folded into a tight, trembling triangle. The clock ticked past 6. Outside, the sky had turned a dirty gold, like a bruise about to spread. Thunder growled far away, long and low. The air inside the apartment felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Then, at 6:33, the front door opened. He walked in like he always did. Slow, confident, whistling the first few notes of that old Johnny Cash song he liked. He smelled like cologne, but faint, like he wanted to be clean, but only on the surface. He clapped his hands once. "Now that's what I call a proper dinner," he said, surveying the room. "Just like we used to. See? Order brings peace." Mom forced a smile, nodding toward the roast. He sat down at the head of the table. I took the seat across from him. Mom settled between us, quieter than usual. He lifted his glass of sweet tea and tapped his ring gently against it. 1, 2, 3 soft clicks. "You hear that?" he said, smiling. "That's the sound of a family back on track." I didn't blink. "Maybe it's not the food keeping us together," I said. His smile flickered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shook my head. "Just that appearances can be deceiving." He leaned forward. "You think you're smarter than me now, son?" "No," I replied, calm and even. "I just think you're outnumbered." He let out a slow chuckle, the kind he used when pretending not to be bothered. "You think your mother's gonna back you up?" he asked. "She knows what happens when lines get crossed." I didn't look at Mom. I didn't need to. I wasn't talking about her. His eyebrows twitched. That was the moment. He scanned the room, just once, fast. And I saw it. He caught the blink, the little red light by the shelf. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. "You've been busy," he muttered, stabbing at his food. "You have no idea." The conversation turned shallow after that. Small talk, fake compliments, forced laughter. He told a story about his Navy days, about discipline and pride, and how men were built for structure. Mom got up to check the oven twice, though we'd already eaten. Her hands were shaking both times. I kept my tone light, my expressions calm, but my hands were balled into fists under the table, sweat pooling in my palms. Every second felt like a countdown. Every word we spoke hovered in the air like dust unsettled. Then, finally, he drained his glass and leaned back in his chair. "Good dinner," he said. "Best we've had in months." I nodded once. "You should smile while you still can." He laughed. "What's that? You threatening me now?" I tilted my head slightly, voice soft but solid. "No, just saying. After tonight, the whole neighborhood will see who you really are." He froze. The camera blinked again. He froze. The camera blinked again, that small red light pulsing in the dim glow of the dining room. A heartbeat neither of us could ignore. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of thunder outside filled the silence, rolling low and steady, like something waiting for its cue. He finally stood, slow and deliberate, his chair legs scraping across the tile. "You're getting bold, Rowan," he said, his tone low, almost conversational. "Too bold." Mom reached for the plates, trying to break the tension. "Let's not," she began. "Sit down," he snapped. The words hit the room like a slap. She froze mid-motion, the dish trembling slightly in her hands before she set it down and sat again, eyes downcast. I stayed where I was, hands folded on the table. My heart was pounding, but I made sure my voice stayed even. "Dinner's over, Dad. You should get some rest." He laughed, not the loud kind, but the small dry one that meant danger. "Rest? You think I can rest after the stunt you pulled?" "What stunt?" He began pacing, moving from one end of the room to the other, pretending to tidy the space, straightening a picture frame that didn't need straightening, brushing imaginary crumbs off the counter. His footsteps were heavy, measured, the rhythm of a man keeping himself from exploding. "You've been acting strange lately," he said finally. "You hiding something?" I shook my head. "Just tired, that's all." He smiled then, slow, unpleasant. "Tired. That's what your mother says too, every time she forgets her place." A bolt of lightning flashed through the blinds, slicing his face into sharp angles. The power flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. For a few seconds, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of rain hammering the windows. In that darkness, his voice came, sharper, stripped of its usual calm. "You think I don't notice things? I always notice. That's why people respect me." "No," I said, my voice steady, the words barely louder than the thunder. "That's why people fear you." Then the lights came back on. He was standing across from me, eyes wide, jaw tight. And for the first time in my life, he looked unsure. The rain outside intensified, hitting the roof like pebbles. He took a step forward, pointing toward the bookshelf. "That camera," he said, voice shaking with anger disguised as control. "Where is it?" I didn't answer. He turned, scanning the shelves, the books, the frames, the trinkets, his breathing getting louder, faster. His hand swept across the surface, sending a few objects clattering to the floor. But the camera was gone. I'd moved it an hour before dinner. "What are you playing at?" he demanded. I stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a quiet scrape. "You've been playing for decades, Dad. I just learned the rules." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. I could see the reflection of lightning flash across the window again, illuminating his face. Not angry now, but something worse. Afraid. He laughed then, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You think this makes you a man? Talking back to your father? You've forgotten what respect looks like." I took a step closer. "No, I just stopped mistaking fear for respect." The muscles in his jaw flexed. He reached for the glass bottle sitting on the table, the one he'd used for tea. He rolled it in his hand, tapping the neck of it against his palm. "I gave you everything," he said, voice trembling between fury and pride. "A roof, food, a family name. And this is how you repay me?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could think of was the sound of his laughter years ago, that same hollow tone, when the police officer came to the door after a noise complaint. I was 14 then, standing by the stairs, half hidden, listening. "It's just a misunderstanding, officer," he'd said back then, all charm and false sincerity. "My boy and I got a little carried away fixing the place up." The officer had smiled, tipped his hat, and left. No one asked about the broken lamp or the bruise on my arm. I remembered how proud Dad looked afterward, like he'd just won a medal. "That's how a real man handles things," he told me. "Never show weakness. Never let anyone question you." That same voice echoed now, but this time I saw it for what it was, a mask, and it was cracking. He raised the bottle slightly, his voice low. "You think you can embarrass me, boy?" I stepped forward until only the table separated us. "I don't have to," I said quietly. "You're doing it yourself." The storm outside roared. Lightning struck somewhere nearby, bright enough to burn through the blinds. For a split second, the room turned white, then black again. And in that heartbeat of darkness, the bottle shattered. The sound tore through the apartment, merging with the thunder. Sharp, final. Then everything went silent. Mom gasped somewhere behind me. I couldn't see her, but I could hear the tremor in her breath. The lights flickered one last time, then went out completely. And for a moment, the world finally matched the darkness we'd lived in for years. Then came the quiet. No more shouting, no more crashing thunder, just the low hum of the refrigerator trying to come back to life, and the rain easing off into a soft patter against the windows. The clock on the stove blinked 12 hour in blue, over and over, a reset we didn't ask for. I stood still in the center of the room, surrounded by broken glass and the smell of old rage. Across the living room, Cliff sat on the edge of the couch. He hadn't moved since the bottle shattered. One hand rested on his knee, the other hung limp at his side, fingers twitching like they were still deciding whether to curl into a fist. His eyes didn't look at me, not at the mess, not at Mom, just at nothing. I exhaled slowly, picked up the broom from the hallway closet, and began sweeping. The sound of bristles dragging across tile filled the silence. Shh, shh. The rhythm of it was almost meditative, but there was nothing peaceful about it. This wasn't the kind of cleanup we did to keep the peace. This was something else, something final. From the kitchen doorway, Mom watched. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red. She hadn't spoken since the lights came back. She opened her mouth once, then shut it again. Her voice finally came in a whisper. "Don't say anything. Not tonight." I paused, leaning on the broom handle, looking at her. "I'm done saying nothing," I said. She didn't reply, but her hand pressed against her chest like she was trying to steady something that had been shaken loose inside her. Across the room, Cliff let out a breath. "You think you've won something?" His voice was quieter now, but there was something cold underneath, like the aftertaste of steel. "You think this little performance means anything?" I didn't answer, just kept sweeping. He shifted on the couch. "You think you're saving her," he said, gesturing lazily toward Mom without even looking at her. "But all you're doing is making her soft. She needs me to be strong." I turned to face him. "No, She needs to remember she's still human. That caught him off guard. His jaw twitched. He stood slowly, brushing invisible dust off his pants like this was just another Tuesday night, like he wasn't standing in the ruins of his own illusion. "You'll regret this," he said, voice almost gentle. "I already did," I replied. "For 28 years. He didn't have a comeback this time. He just walked to the door, his movements steady, but slower than usual. Like he couldn't quite believe his control had slipped and didn't know how to recover it. Mom took a step toward him, maybe out of instinct, maybe out of fear. But I reached for her hand, and she stopped. He looked at both of us like we were strangers, like we'd broken some silent contract he'd expected us to uphold forever. Then, without another word, he pulled the door open. A gust of cool night air rolled in. The hallway outside smelled like wet concrete and someone else's laundry, the kind of ordinary that felt foreign in a moment like this. He looked back once, not angry, just confused. And then he stepped out. The door slammed shut behind him. Mom flinched. I didn't. I turned back to the broom. The glass sparkled under the light from the street lamp outside. I bent down and began gathering the larger shards into a dustpan. The biggest piece had a smear of dried tea on it, the last trace of the bottle he'd used like a weapon, and then discarded like everything else. As I cleaned, I remembered the first time I'd swept up broken glass. I was 11. He'd thrown a plate that night. I don't remember why. Probably something small. Mom had cried quietly in the bathroom, and I'd grabbed the broom because I thought that would fix things. That night, I swept to make it all feel normal again. This time, I swept to make it end. Mom moved beside me, kneeling to help. Her hands shook as she picked up tiny slivers with a damp paper towel, careful not to cut herself. We worked together without speaking for several minutes. Then, without looking up, she said, "He'll come back worse." I paused, brushing the last few pieces into the pan. "No," I said, "he won't come back here again." There was no anger in my voice, no bravado, just a certainty I hadn't felt until I said the words out loud. She looked at me like she didn't quite believe it, but wanted to. Like the part of her that still lived in fear was squinting towards something she couldn't see yet. "I mean it," I said. "He's not coming back. Not like that." She sat back on her heels and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I never wanted you to have to fight him." I set the dustpan on the counter and turned to her. "You didn't make me fight him. He did." We sat there for a while, her on the floor, me standing by the sink. The apartment had never felt so still. No TV, no humming threats, no fake jokes meant to fill the air with something less dangerous. Just quiet. Then the light over the dining table flickered once. Not fully out, just a brief hesitation. Like even the house wasn't sure if it could believe what had just happened. I looked at the door. The lock was still turned. The hallway outside was quiet. I whispered to myself, "He doesn't know it yet, but that was his last door slam." I stood there a moment longer, staring at the wood grain of that door like it had just turned into something else. Something permanent. Not a barrier, not a threat. Just an ending. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay on the couch with a throw blanket up to my chest, watching the ceiling fan turn in slow, groaning circles. Mom had gone into her room, left the door cracked slightly like she used to when I was a kid. Back then, it was to let the light in. Now it was so she could hear if he came back. He didn't. Not yet. By morning, the storm had broken completely. The sun poured through the windows in slanted stripes. soft and deceptive, like nothing had happened. Birds chirped outside like they'd missed the show entirely. I smelled coffee before I even opened my eyes. In the kitchen, Mom stood at the counter, back turned to me, stirring sugar into a mug like it was the most ordinary day in the world. But her hands trembled, just slightly. I noticed because I was looking for it. "He's gone," she said, without turning around. I sat up slowly. "Maybe." She set the spoon down too carefully. "No, I mean it. I think maybe this time it's really over." I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth I felt down in my spine. A few minutes passed in silence before a knock came at the door. Sharp, measured, familiar. Mom froze. Her hand hovered over the sugar jar like she'd forgotten what she was doing. "Please," she whispered, "don't open it." I walked to the door, not rushing, not hesitating. I unlocked it slowly, letting the click echo. Then I pulled it open. And there he was, wearing the same wrinkled button-down from the night before, holding a small grocery store bouquet, daisies and roses wrapped in plastic, the kind you buy in a hurry, trying to look like you planned something. "Morning, champ," he said, voice smooth like he'd just come back from church instead of a fight. I didn't step aside, just stared at him. "You gonna let me in?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just walked back toward the kitchen. He followed like he owned the place, which, technically, he still did. He set the flowers down on the counter. "You made coffee," he said to Mom like nothing had happened. "Smells good." She didn't reply. He glanced at me and gave a chuckle. "Rough night, huh? Guess we all said some things we didn't mean." That line, I'd heard it so many times it could have been stitched into the walls, but this time I didn't look away. "You came back fast," I said flatly. "Didn't even give us a full day of peace." He tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "You're still angry," he said, shrugging. "That's okay. You'll grow out of it." I tilted my head. "You're right. I am growing out of it. Out of this house. Out of your control." His eyes narrowed, and that's when I nodded subtly toward the window. Outside, a police cruiser sat idling at the curb. The lights weren't flashing. Not yet. Just a presence, a quiet one, but real. Mom looked at me, shocked. Cliff's voice dropped half a register. "You wouldn't dare." I met his gaze, steady. "You taught me how not to flinch," I said. "Remember?" For the first time in a long time, his confidence broke. He looked between me, the cruiser, and Mom. And for a second, I saw something unfamiliar in him. Not rage, not guilt, fear. He tried to laugh again, but it didn't land. "This is family business," he said louder, pacing now. "Not police business?" I stepped in front of Mom. "It stopped being family the first time you hit her." He pointed a finger at me like he had a case to argue. "You don't understand. I was trying to—" "No," I cut in. "You were trying to make her small enough to fit your ego. That's not protection. That's power. And you're losing it." He went silent. Even the fridge seemed to hush. Outside, the siren gave a soft whoop, a heads up. The cruiser door opened. Cliff turned toward the door like he was going to bolt. But then he stopped, one hand on the knob, the other clenched at his side. He didn't turn around, just spoke into the room like we were ghosts. "You'll regret this." I looked at his back, memorizing the slope of his shoulders, the tension in his stance. A man who once thought he could rule by fear, now reduced to a final threat. "That's the last promise of yours I'll ever believe," I said. He hesitated, then opened the door. As he stepped outside, 2 officers met him. one of them already reaching for his notepad. He didn't fight, didn't shout, just walked like a man who wasn't sure if he'd lost or if the game had changed without him. Mom stood frozen near the kitchen sink, one hand covering her mouth. I walked over to the flowers he left on the counter. They were already wilting. I stared at the flowers. The petals had browned at the edges, curling inward like they were trying to hide. They weren't wilting from age. They were wilting from truth. Cliff never brought gifts to give. He brought them to cover tracks, to silence questions. 3 nights had passed since the officers walked him out of our home. Since then, not a sound from him. No phone calls, no stomping boots, no lectures echoing through the hall. The silence was heavy, not peaceful yet, just different. I woke that morning to the sound of soft rain, not pounding like the last storm, but tapping, rhythmic, like a reminder. It filled the room, mixed with the hum of the fridge and the distant groan of the pipes. The kind of quiet you notice because it's too new to trust. I walked into the kitchen. Mom sat on the couch with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't sipped from. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd spent years folding herself in to make room for someone else. "It's too quiet," she said without looking at me. "I don't know what to do with quiet." I leaned against the counter. "We'll learn." She finally turned her head toward me. No smile, just a long, tired look that understood I wasn't trying to comfort her. I was giving her a promise. The next few hours passed like a strange kind of rehearsal for life. I took out the trash. An act that used to involve watching the door, making sure I didn't leave it open too long in case Cliff yelled about the AC bill. I fixed a curtain rod that had been hanging crooked for 2 years. I made scrambled eggs and toast. Mom didn't eat much, but she sat at the table. That was new. While sweeping under the cabinet, I found it, a shard of glass from the broken bottle. It had lodged deep behind the baseboard, missed during cleanup. I picked it up with a paper towel, turning it in my fingers. Then I walked to the window, slid it open, and tossed the shard into the alley below. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't want to hold on to symbols of survival. I wanted space for something else. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it cautiously, not afraid, just prepared. It was Officer Trent Wallace, mid-30s, polite but distant. I'd met him briefly the night Cliff was taken in. "Morning," he said. "Just here for some paperwork. Standard follow-up." I let him in. Mom stayed back in the kitchen, watching, unsure of how much of this world she wanted to participate in. As he flipped through the documents, he looked up and said, "He's being held. No bail set yet. There's likely going to be a court order for no contact soon." I nodded. "He ever write? Call? Try to reach you?" I shook my head. "Not yet." Trent made a small note, then offered a half smile. "You handled things better than most. Just keep things documented. Any message, even a postcard, let us know." He left after 15 minutes. We were alone again, until a few hours later when the mail came. Mom brought it in, flipping through a thin stack, junk flyers, a utility bill. Then she paused. There was a plain white envelope, no return address, my name on the front. She handed it to me like it was radioactive. I opened it at the sink, just in case. Inside was a single folded sheet, handwritten in the same sharp, slanted script I'd seen on birthday cards and refrigerator notes all my life. "You'll never understand why I did what I did, but one day, you'll thank me for making you strong." No dear Rowan, no love dad, no apology, just another sermon from a man who thought he was molding strength, when really, He was just breaking spirits. I stood there, letter trembling between my fingers. Then I struck a match. The words curled quickly in the sink, blackened at the edges, folded into themselves like they were ashamed to ever exist. I turned on the faucet, watched the ash swirl away. "That's the only thing you ever taught me right," I whispered. "How to end things." The next morning, Mom began pulling things out of drawers. Not frantically, just decisively. She laid out sweaters she hadn't worn in years, photo frames with faces turned downward, coffee mugs we never used because they were his favorites. "We'll move," she said. "Somewhere with sunlight, somewhere quiet." I glanced up from the box I was taping shut. "Not quiet, peaceful." She paused, then nodded. "Yeah, peaceful." That word meant something new now. It wasn't absence, it was intention. That evening, we cleaned the apartment one last time, not out of fear, not to make things look perfect before the monster walked back through the door. We cleaned because we were choosing what stayed behind. At sunset, I walked to the dinner table, the same one that had played background to our quiet humiliations for years. It was spotless now. I placed a single candle in the center, lit it. Mom came over and stood beside me. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. "This time," I said, "we eat for us." And we did. That was a year ago. Now it's a Saturday morning in a modest house on the edge of San Antonio. The sun pushes through the blinds in soft, slanted beams. The kitchen smells like fresh toast and orange zest, and somewhere in the background, an old radio hums with a familiar tune. Nothing special, but everything is different. I set the table with 2 plates and 2 glasses. Nothing fancy, just ours. I pour orange juice instead of wine. There's a small vase in the middle of the table, this time holding daisies from the corner market, not guilt-wrapped carnations from a gas station. Mom stands at the stove, humming softly. She doesn't hum much, or didn't. But lately, it's been happening more. She's wearing her favorite apron, the one with the faded green leaves along the hem. I'd forgotten what her voice sounded like when it wasn't shaped by fear. I glance at the table. Same motions, same hands. But they're no longer bracing for impact, just moving through life. I used to think the dinner table was where fear lived. Turns out, it's where courage learned to sit. A year feels like a lifetime when you've lived decades in survival mode. As we sit, I notice how easily we fall into the moment. No checking the door, no flinching at footsteps, no waiting for the volume to rise from the hallway. Mom pours syrup over her pancakes and smiles at me. Not a big smile, just a quiet one. The kind that says, "I'm still here." She places her hand over mine for a second and says, "You remember that last dinner?" I nod. "Did you ever wonder why I helped you set it up?" she asks. I take a breath, let it out slowly. "I thought maybe you were trying to make him happy. One more chance." She shakes her head. "No, I was scared, but I knew. It was our way of saying goodbye. You had already decided. I just needed to catch up." That night, the one we don't talk about much, it wasn't about pleasing him. It wasn't about fear. It was about control. We set that table like it was a ritual, because it was one. We cleaned, we cooked, we waited. Not for him, but for ourselves. That dinner was a signal, not to him, but to each other. A quiet rebellion in plain sight. The last act we shared under his roof, and the first act of our freedom. We didn't feed him that night. We fed our courage. Later that day, I drive into town. The errands are small, groceries, dry cleaning, but I stop by the old post office. It's habit more than anything else. The same woman is behind the counter, glasses sliding down her nose. She recognizes me. "Haven't seen you in a while," she says. "Guess that's a good thing." She sorts through the bin. "No letters again. Not in months." I nod. Maybe he finally stopped trying to talk. She gives me a look, half sympathy, half relief. Or maybe you just stopped listening. She's right. I thank her and head back out into the sunlight. It's warm. Not like the old house, the one that swallowed sound and stretched out shadows. This heat feels clean. On my way home, I take a short detour. I pull off near the corner of that old apartment complex. It's been painted beige. The metal railings are new. There's a family unloading a minivan out front. The dad, tall, young, lifts his daughter onto his shoulders, and she laughs like someone who's never had to flinch. For a moment, I just watch them, not with envy, not with hate, just hope. I hope they never learn the language of fear, I whisper to myself. Then I turn the key and drive away. It's early evening when I return home. The house feels cool and lived in. Mom is sitting on the porch with a book in her lap and a glass of tea in her hand. She waves me in with a little nod. I start preparing dinner again. Grilled vegetables, chicken, salad. Nothing extravagant, just good, honest food. As the sun dips below the trees, casting gold across the windows, we sit at the table again. Mom lifts her glass. "To peace," she says. I raise mine. To peace, and to never mistaking silence for safety again. The room grows still, not empty, just quiet in the best way. The candle between us flickers, then steadies. The same one from that night. No more trembling, no more waiting. When he found out the real reason for that dinner, he froze. Because for the first time, he realized he was no longer the one being obeyed.